Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm SK. I work for the city of Portland, specifically in the stormwater retrofits program. So I do pretty similar work to this program. Actually, we do technical assistance to help homeowners manage their stormwater on site, or if they have any type of stormwater nuisance problems. And then in some very, very specific parts of the city that are related to bigger sewer rehab projects, will actually build some stormwater management facilities on private property. So that's what I do. And I'm here to talk to you about stormwater. Before I get started, I wanted to just say that I work for the city of Portland. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about, some specifics, are related to Portland directly. But a lot of the stormwater management techniques are pretty standard across the board. So even outside of the city of Portland, it's still applicable. But I just wanted to mention that a lot of it is Portland specific. So if you're outside of Portland, you might want to look up some of the regulations for that specific area. Okay, and then another thing before I get started, I'm just going to give a background about stormwater in general and why we want to manage it, and then go into the specific menu items that participants can get credit for. Okay, here we go. And then if any of the other panelists, facilitators, if we're getting comments about just me talking fast, because I can often get going, especially when I'm talking about stormwater, get really pumped about that. So if I'm talking too fast, just slow me down. Okay, so why stormwater management? So where there used to be really thick, luscious forests with exposed soil that was really soft and had a lot of pore space, now we have a bunch of paved area with very little canopy cover and very little exposed soil. And the soil that we do have that's exposed is often compacted. So in a place where stormwater used to be managed naturally and without really thinking about it, the forest didn't really have to think of a stormwater management plan. It just happened. Now we do have to think of stormwater management. So that's what we're here for. So here's a diagram that just shows pre-development versus post-development. So you could see in the pre-development, some stormwater is being managed by canopy interception. So that means some stormwater, some rain is actually not even making it to the ground to then turn into surface runoff. It's staying in the trees. And then we have a lot more evapotranspiration because there's just a lot more green around that uses that water. And then because the stormwater is able to actually soak into the ground, we have a lot more rain turning into that inner flow, this big arrow down here, where the water is actually able to soak into the ground and then moves through the soil medium below the ground. And there is still some surface runoff, but you can see in this picture, it's one of the smaller arrows, versus on the other side, post-development, very little canopy interception and just a ton more surface runoff because the water isn't able to actually soak into the ground and get to that subsoil layer where it can recharge the inner flow arrow here. And so a big majority of it is turning into surface runoff. And why do we have to think about surface runoff? What's the big deal about that? Oh wait, hold on. Let me go back. So I just wanted to talk about, again, I work for the city of Portland. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the stormwater system looks like in Portland and kind of why. And then once I talk about this, you'll understand a little bit more of the effects that runoff can have. So if we're starting here in the middle of the city, we have a combined sewer system. This means that the stormwater and the sewage is piped underground to the same pipes and then piped to the treatment plant and treated. So here in this portion of the city, the stormwater system is piped and underground and mixes with sewage. Then once you get into these outer areas like North Portland and East Portland, this is where the storm and the sewer actually separated. So they're still piped, but instead of the stormwater being piped with the sewage to the treatment plant, the stormwater is piped separately to things called sumps or dry wells, which are basically like the reverse of a regular well. So oftentimes there's these big, huge concrete cylinders that are below ground that have holes in them. The water is piped to these stormwater facilities and then given the chance to soak, to infiltrate through the holes in the concrete cylinder into the surrounding medium, into the surrounding soil, and then eventually over time can then soak down and recharge the groundwater in those areas. And then as you get further out, in these green areas here on the west side and then up along the Columbia, that's where the stormwater system changes from a piped system to something that looks more like ditches and culverts and seasonal springs or seasonal streams. And these three types of stormwater system it encompasses the whole system. So yeah. And so, yeah, so why do we have to worry about runoff? What's the big deal about runoff? It's just water. But no, it can have a huge impacts. And I wanted to talk a little bit before about the types of systems so that we can think more about how the runoff can affect those systems. So a big one is just the physical impacts of having a ton of water moving at a really quick speed. So I'm sure everyone has experienced this where it doesn't seem like it's raining really even that hard, but you can see kind of a little stream starting to develop on your street along the curb. And that's because stormwater can really accumulate and it can accumulate fast. And when you have water running through the same pathways, it causes erosion, which can then cause pipes to be exposed, has a negative effect on habitat, and even and including, you can see in this picture, some sedimentation getting into the waterways, which also negatively affects habitat. Second way, I talked about those sumps, so the stormwater going to these underground parts of the city, and as stormwater makes its way down the street, it's not only picking up other water and picking up speed, but it's also picking up pollutants from cars, from just all the things that we humans do. And then specifically, if we're talking about in those sumped areas, that's where those pollutants are then put underground and then allowed to soak into the groundwater. Or if we're in one of those natural areas where the stormwater is handled naturally, then that pollutant just goes straight to streams. It doesn't even really have a chance to be treated by the treatment plant. And then just the more that runs off with our stormwater, so the more debris, the more pollutants, it just puts a bigger strain on our system, even the piped system. So again, I'm sure everyone has experienced this where you have an inlet on your street that's just chock full of leaves and debris and isn't able to actually let that stormwater down into the pipes. When that happens, those have to be maintained by folks on the ground. So if someone has to come out there and actually physically suck all that stuff out of the inlet to even allow the stormwater to get there. So yeah, it's just a higher burden on the system itself, and then a higher burden on the maintenance, and even on the treatment plant, all of those pollutants going to the treatment plant, then the treatment plant has to deal with that. So yeah, let's do some retrofits instead. So using retrofits as part of the solution, it mimics the natural hydrologic cycle in a manner that is safe and effective for the site and the neighboring properties. So it's doing what nature used to do before we paved it over with streets and sidewalks. So the four main components to any stormwater management project. First is collect and convey. So for a roof, that would be collecting with the gutters. If it's a paved area, collecting with curbs, and then moving it to the area of the property where then it can have a chance to slow down. So that's the second part, slowing down and detaining, giving it time and space to sit in one spot. So then the third component, then it has the time to infiltrate or evaporate or be used by the plants around it. And then the fourth component, this is something that I think about a lot in my work, is no matter how robust the design is for the stormwater facility, you always want to have some sort of safe overflow or escape route in the case that the stormwater facility, say it's a rain garden, does fill up and doesn't infiltrate, soak into the ground fast enough. It has a way to overflow away from the house, because you don't want it to back up into the house or other assets that can be damaged by water. Because when you get a lot of water in one place, it is definitely a force. So you want to be able to have a release valve for that force, be in case something happens. You never know. And especially as our world changes and as weather changes, yeah, this is definitely something I think about a lot. We don't know what our storms are going to be like in the future, 50 years from now. So I keep that in mind, and always design an escape route no matter how robust the facility is. Yeah, so the benefits of a stormwater retrofit, the simplest solution, it's right there. This diagram is kind of silly, but that's exactly kind of how I think about it. It's the stormwater is already there. Like, might as well just manage it where it's at, where it falls. Community engagement, it's especially the work that I do, people doing retrofitting stormwater. When they learn about the stormwater system and understand their role and how they can actually help, then they get really pumped about it. They tell their neighbors, and then pretty soon the whole street has rain gardens, and people like to know that they are having a positive influence on their community. And then the watershed benefits, obviously, keeping the water where it has historically been, being able to recharge the groundwater, adding native plants, and all of that great stuff that comes with just like adding green space to a city. And then again, reduce costs. I talked a little bit about this before, but just taking that burden off of our piped public system, less maintenance, and yeah, less cost for all of us, because we all participate through taxes and all that stuff. Okay, so that was just an overview of stormwater and why it's such an important issue. And now I'm going to go into the individual stormwater menu options that participants can choose to get the stormwater credit. And I'm just going to go through all of these. I guess we can save the questions. Originally, I was going to say we could take questions for each one, but I think maybe we should just save all the questions for the end. So here we go. Large canopy trees. So I talked a little bit about this before, having big trees. I think maybe you all have experienced this as well, of like standing under a tree when it's raining and you can actually stay pretty dry under there. Obviously, larger evergreen trees are gonna be more effective at intercepting stormwater because they have their leaves during the time of the season when we get a lot of stormwater. But even deciduous large trees, when they lose their leaves in the winter, can still have a noticeable effect. So those are still good too. And obviously it adds habitat. Trees, I always say this, trees are the answers to everything. They really just bring so many benefits. And so there's a link here to a BES tree bait program. So this is for the city of Portland specifically, where you can get a one-time credit on your stormwater bill, I believe, for planting a tree during the months of September and April. So they really want to make sure that people are planting trees during the right time of the year, so just not right before summer. And then, but again, that's for Portland, city of Portland specifically, so wouldn't really help out for those outside of Portland areas. But Friends of Trees is a great community resource and helps people plant trees, and they work beyond the city of Portland. So that's a good one to get people to help people plant more trees. And it is appropriate for all sites. Not all trees are appropriate for all sites, but all sites can accommodate some tree. And you just gotta be aware of overhead power utilities and the like, but I would say most appropriate for most sites. Okay, next one. So downspout disconnection. So the way that this looks is a downspout that extends from the building and discharges to a landscape. The function of this is allowing the stormwater to get to the vegetated area where it can then infiltrate and soak into the ground. Okay, again, I just kind of want to give you guys some background of the design and how to spot effective stormwater management and non-effective stormwater management. Give you guys some tools to be able to identify and hopefully help the participants to truly manage their stormwater on site. So the drainage area should be at least 10% of the roof area. So if you have a roof area that's 1,000 square feet, the vegetated area where the downspout is disconnected should be at least 100 square feet. And make sure that the landscape slopes away from buildings, because you don't want the stormwater to get stuck right up against this, the footing or the basement and cause nuisance flooding in the basement. So with a slight slope away from the house, then you can ensure that the water doesn't stay in that spot and cause more problems. And can be used with other stormwater facilities. I'll bring this in when I talk about swales and rain gardens. And then, yeah, you definitely want participants to have some sort of erosion control right where the water discharges from the downspout, because you can get some erosion there and again create some type of depression where then the water stays close to the house and causes nuisance flooding. So you really want to be careful about that. And then key component, make sure the standpipes, the pipe, you can kind of see it here. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but the pipe, so the downspout is the material that's on the house. The standpipe is the pipe that actually takes it underground. So making sure that you cap that standpipe, because especially in combined areas of the city, that standpipe connects straight to the sewer. So that's an opportunity, if you don't cap it, for animals to come in and out of the sewer, and you don't want that. So make sure that's capped if they do have disconnected downspout. Okay, so the setbacks, again, these are specific for the city of Portland, but it's pretty universal across the stormwater management board. Discharge 6 feet from basements. And I personally, when I'm designing things, I like to give it a little bit extra buffer when I know that there's a finished basement, just because it's a little bit more of a risk. If water does get in there, it's going to be more of a headache. But 6 feet is the official setback requirement, and then 2 feet from any foundations or slab or crawl space. And then 5 feet from property lines. So that's neighboring property lines, and then also the property line to the sidewalk. And then if there's a roof area that's greater than 5,000 square feet, you actually need a permit to manage that stormwater on site. But anything less than 5,000 square feet, you could just do your project. There's no need for a permit. Again, in the city of Portland. And then here are some examples of some good effective disconnections. So I'll just start up in the top left corner. So we have a rain chain here. A key, something important to think about for rain chains is that the bottom is secure. And so here in this specific example, the bottom of the chain is connected to the pot. The water is allowed to fill up the pot and then it overflows beyond the pot. So just making sure that, again, where it overflows is at least 2 feet from the slab, 6 feet from a basement, the same setbacks. Here, the next one over, we have a rock to control for erosion. Down below, this is one of my old boss's houses, actually. This is just to show you that you can get pretty creative with these things, and really add to the overall experience of the space, and not just just stormwater. You can get something pretty cool in there. And then this is just your standard disconnection with the foot there to uh, limit the erosion. And then here are some disconnections you want to be on the lookout for. I know the whole point of this program is to really encourage people to do this kind of work and create habitat. But some of these examples, they're just not long-term solutions. So being able to point them out and maybe guide people in the right direction. So the first thing is where it's disconnected, it should be an impervious surface. So here it's being, pervious. It should be disconnected to a pervious surface, not impervious. So here it's disconnected to a brick path, which is impervious. So that's not gonna do a whole lot for managing the stormwater, and especially during the winter when we can get into those freezing temperatures, this is a hazard for sure. Over here, this top one, it's going to a vegetated area, so that's good, and it's definitely meeting the setback requirements, but the way that it's constructed is just not a long-term solution. Someone can trip over it and knock it down, and then it's no longer effective, or people would just get irritated with having to step around it and take it apart. So you really want to have something that is a long-term solution to stormwater. The next one down, it's kind of hard to see, but this is disconnected straight to the sidewalk. So that's not really accomplishing managing your stormwater at all. It's just moving it to the sidewalk, where then it runs down the sidewalk and gets to our public sewer, and is essentially the same thing as just having your stormwater piped to the sewer underground. So again, we want to have that 5-foot setback rule even from the sidewalk there. And then underneath this one, there's a whole lot of things that are going wrong in this situation. So first, you can see this pipe here is discharging right almost exactly at the footing. And you really want to be at least 2 feet away from any footings. And then also, didn't talk too much about this, but I'll get into it a little bit on the next slide. You can see this is a really steep slope here with very little ground cover. So that water doesn't really have a chance to actually slow down and soak into the ground. That's what we're looking for here, giving the water a chance to slow down and stay on site. So in this picture here, it's just a really steep slope, not a whole lot of vegetation. That water is just going straight down that hill and not stopping. And then this one over here, again, we want the disconnection to be to a vegetated area. Here, it's going mostly to the driveway, which then just flows down the driveway into the street and then back into our sewer system, and not staying on site at all. Okay, moving on to the next one. That was downspout disconnections. Okay, so this is what I was talking about the slope and stuff. So steep slopes, you'll see this a lot on the west side of Portland. Those are just not good places to do a disconnection. If I saw something like this, I would probably recommend they actually connect to the sewer system, because it's gonna erode this hillside. You'll get slope creep. The slope will start sliding down over time. It's just not a good situation. So yeah, this question down here, just because you can doesn't mean you should. This is one of the stormwater menu items that really is not always appropriate for every site. So yeah, you have to have specific sites that can actually handle this menu item effectively and correctly. All right, next one, rain gardens. So the way that the way this takes form is a shallow vegetated landscape depression with a flat bottom and gently sloping sides. And the function of this, again, is to give the water time to accumulate and then slowly soak into the ground. So this can be an option for a site that maybe a downspout disconnect isn't an option because the slope is too steep, and you can get a sort of tiered rain garden in there, with the flat bottoms for each section. Make sure it's planted with native water and drought tolerant species, because they're going to get a ton of water in the winter and not at all any water in the summer. And you don't want to have to be putting too much energy into this element. Yeah, you want it to kind of be self-sufficient after some time. And it really is best in areas with 2 inches, with drainage of 2 inches an hour or greater. So there are ways you could do a pit test, or the homeowner could do a pit test and figure out the drainage. And there are ways to do rain gardens in areas that have slower infiltration. I'll talk about that in a second. So again, the setbacks are the same for a rain garden and downspout disconnection. So 6 feet from basements, 2 feet from any foundation crawl space, and 5 feet from all property lines. And then again, not required for drainage areas that are less than 5,000 square feet, or permits are not required. All right, so if a homeowner does have a site where the drainage is not more than 2 inches an hour, you can over excavate the rain garden. So just make it a lot bigger than the 10%. So I don't think that I mentioned that in here. Yeah, so the sizing is the same for a rain garden and downspout disconnect. So 10% drainage area for the amount of impervious area that's going to the rain garden. So if you have drainage that's less than 2 inches an hour, you can over excavate. So instead of doing 10%, do something more like 20 to 25%. So you would make it really, really big, give it a lot of extra room to soak in, and give it more time to actually get down into the soil. So over excavate, and then you can add a layer of drain rock, which gives it that extra boost for drainage. And then you would move forward as you would a normally sized rain garden with the growing material, and still making sure that the bottom of the rain garden is flat, and then from the flat area goes up gently to the sides. Okay. So this dry creek swale is similar to a rain garden. It's a variation of a rain garden. So what I think of the difference between a swale and a rain garden looks like a dry pond. A swale looks like a dry creek. It's more of a linear, drawn out, elongated rain garden. And these are good for established areas or backyards where maybe the homeowner doesn't want to give up a whole 100 square feet for a rain garden. You can have a really long, meandering, dry creek bed swale, and that will do a similar job of just allowing the water to slow down and soak into the ground. A dry creek bed swale is not its own individual item. It's just a variation of a rain garden. Basically does the same thing. Okay, so here's some rain gardens gone wrong. I'll start up here in the top left corner. So this one here, it's very small. This probably would have, for it to be adequately sized, this rain garden would have to drain like 100 square feet because it's so small. You can see how small it is. So it's not gonna be able to manage the roof area. And then also on this one, you have a retaining wall. You have retaining walls on all sides. That's just gonna constrain the rain garden and give it less of a place where it can actually soak into the ground. So a normal rain garden, adequate rain garden, the water soaks in, but then also spreads out a little bit. So as it soaks in, it'll kind of do this cone effect. So in this rain garden here with the retaining walls, it doesn't have the opportunity to spread out as it soaks in. So it's just not going to drain as fast as a rain garden without retaining walls. And it's just not good for the retaining walls. It's not good for the house. Yeah. And then over here to the right, you can kind of see that you can see the pipe coming in right there. And it's just not adequately sized for the area that's managing it. So this rain garden would have to be bumped out and have a deeper, more of a depression. It's hard to really even see the depression in this one. And then this bottom one here, again, it's up against this retaining wall. It's a little bit bigger, so maybe it's adequately sized, but the retaining walls, you really want to be careful with retaining walls. The way that we work with retaining walls, we consider them the same as like a foundation or a footing. So we try to be at least 2 feet back from a retaining wall if we are going to put a rain garden there. And the further you can get from a retaining wall, the better. Better for the rain garden, better for the retaining wall. Okay, next item, reducing impervious area. So minimum reduction of 500 square feet. This one's pretty straightforward, I would say. The less impervious area, the less runoff you have, and also the more opportunities you have to do something else with that area. So you can use that area to increase the naturescaping and increase just general pervious areas on the site. So this is also one that is appropriate for all sites. And then I have a link here for an organization, DPAVE, that works with private property owners to to depave their site and release the soil. That could be a good resource for people. So here are some examples of reducing impervious areas. So these are pavers, pervious pavers on the left hand here, and then on the right, this is actually pervious concrete. You can see the difference, or maybe it's asphalt. There's pervious concrete and pervious asphalt, and they both kind of look similar. More larger grains in the concrete, you can sometimes see more pore space in there. And yeah, and then with the pervious concrete and asphalt, they both actually do have some maintenance requirements. So I've heard people say that you're supposed to vacuum them to like take out the dirt and stuff that's clogging them up. So yeah, vacuuming or just making sure, clearing out the debris from time to time, just making sure that there's not a ton of debris so that when the water hits the concrete or the asphalt, it actually can soak into the ground and there's not a whole lot of other stuff there blocking it. And that's the same with the pavers too. All of these things, if they're covered by leaves, the water is not going to be able to get in contact with them and then soak into the ground. All right. And then this is a cool example of actually using impervious material to create a pervious space. So, and also giving opportunity to use what you have to create what you're looking for. So taking pieces of the pervious surface, impervious surface, breaking it up and creating a design that does allow for the water, even though rainwater is hitting this impervious surface and creating a small bit of runoff, it then just runs off a little bit to the side and is able to soak in. So I think this one's a super cool way to manage stormwater, because you don't have to get specific fancy concrete. You could just use what you have. All right, so I guess this is kind of similar to removing pervious area, so removing grass and sod. Grass and sod can, in a lot of cases, act like an impervious surface, especially on, and even if it has just a little bit of a slope, grass is just horrible for soaking up water. I mean, it'll do it, but it's really not great. The grass has like really thick shallow roots, so it's just hard for the water to just get in there. So yeah, removing at least 500 square feet of grass. Again, it's the same with removing impervious area. Just gives more opportunity to do something else with that ground, additional naturescaping, and maybe plant a tree, something like that. Again, appropriate for all sites. Any site that has grass, get rid of that. Yeah, so here's some examples. This was a lawn, and then they removed the sod and was able to put all these other plants that just have a ton more benefit than grass. I feel like I have like a passion against lawns. I feel very passionately about getting rid of lawns. Unless you really use them, like if you're gonna play soccer or something on that. But I just feel like most people don't actually use their lawns, so yeah, get rid of that stuff. Okay, next, Eco Roof. This is probably one that you're not gonna see very often, but it's a menu item, so I'll go through it. The form that it takes is specific and selected plant species growing in a shallow medium on top of a waterproof roofing material. And the function, again, is to increase the vegetated area to allow water to soak in. And specifically with Eco Roof, it's not, it's more like a time delay. So I'll show you a little bit, but Eco Roofs are more for slowing the water down and not necessarily, there is some evaporation, but it's more for slowing the water down during those really peak storm events where there's just a ton of storm water in the system. Even slowing it down just a little bit, even if it eventually does make it to the system, shaving off that peak of storm water that's getting into our system is hugely beneficial. So here's a diagram. You could see it's very, very hard to see, but we have waterproof membrane that is in contact with the roof, and then we have a drainage layer, and then the growing medium, usually like 3 to 4 inches for a standard Eco Roof, and then the vegetation tend to be more like ground cover and sedum type plants that have really shallow roots. And then you can see that there is a drain, so the water has to go somewhere. So it'll soak through the medium, through the drainage layer, and then eventually find its way to the drain, which the drain is then hooked up to often hooked up to the stormwater system or the sewer system. I have seen before Eco Roofs that the drain is then hooked up to like disconnected downspout and then goes to a dry creek bed to a rain garden. You can get pretty creative with these things. And yeah, so here's an example of an Eco Roof. It does reduce the runoff on the surface, increases habitat, increases the roof life because it's not, you're not getting a ton of water right on your roof. And yeah, there's some resources here for building an Eco Roof. Yeah, hopefully you guys see one of those because that's pretty sweet. Okay, so the next item is increasing naturescaping. So I guess if they increase their natives 10% beyond the naturescaping requirement, that can be counted for the stormwater portion. So it can increase the interception by having those multiple canopy layers and just increasing the amount of water that can actually find its way hitting the ground. And the roots are just a lot stronger. They're good for erosion control and infiltration. They actually get down into the soil, so then the water that does find its way to the ground can follow those roots further down into the ground, not like grass that's really short roots, and the water, if it finds the grass roots, it's not really going very far. So again, appropriate for all sites, especially when coupled with removing sod and other impervious area. Okay, restoring the soils. So leaving debris on site, so leaves, pine needles, all of that debris from the site, leaving it on site, adding more composts to the site, and just allowing the water to hit the ground and have some space to stay on site and slow down, and then soak into the ground and increase this subsurface interflow layer. And I just wanted to say on this one, it doesn't have to be, the homeowner doesn't have to have leaves just strewn about the whole lawn. I think maybe Megan can speak to this if this isn't right, but as long as they can do it in a portion of the yard and still get some credit for that. And again,
yes, SK, just to confirm, they don't just have to leave the leaves entirely, they could congregate them.
Yeah. So again, appropriate for all sites. Just leave your leaves on site and let it decompose and turn into compost, and add more pore space and organic matter, and then the soils will then have higher holding capacity for water. Because a lot of soils in cities just generally are very compacted. And so adding more organic material will kind of give it that forest, soft, spongy feel over time, over a lot of time. Okay, and then another menu item here, water conservation. So this is something that you might not see when you go out to the site. So from memory, it's kind of a conversation that you have to have with the homeowner, talk to them about their watering practices, and if they are watering less or spot watering, or not watering at all, they can get credit towards stormwater. And again, appropriate for all sites. Okay, this is not a menu item, but I just like to put it in here just to get people thinking of it. And if they do see these types of systems, just know that it's not officially a stormwater management menu item. And that's specifically because it's not really keeping the water on site and like recharging the groundwater and adding all those natural benefits. All rain barrel or cistern systems have to have some type of overflow. And if you've ever had a rain barrel, you know how quickly those things can fill up. So just if you do come across it, just making sure, well, I guess you're not really doing anything about it, but if you see that it's a small system and there's not a nice way that makes sense for the water to overflow, maybe mention that to the homeowner. Especially often they're right next to the house, so when they do overflow, that can often lead to nuisance flooding because it's overflowing right next to the house. So it's not a menu item. People cannot get credit for it, but it could be a good opportunity to just talk about stormwater in general with the homeowners. All right. Next one, eco-friendly maintenance practices. So hand pulling, eliminating power tools, utilizing eco-biz landscape contractors. So again, this is something that you probably wouldn't notice right off the bat from just visiting a site. It's probably something you'll figure out from talking with the homeowner and talking with them about their maintenance practices. And again, appropriate for all sites. Okay, flow through planters. This is not a menu item, but I did want to talk about it because there's two types of planters. There's the flow through planters that actually work very similarly to the eco roofs, where they have a drain that then goes back into the system. And then there's infiltration planters. And I just wanted to, an infiltration planter is basically the same thing as a rain garden. It just is more contained. It usually looks like it's a planter, so it has those concrete borders, but it has a opening on the bottom where the water can infiltrate, And so those are basically the same as rain gardens, but a flow through planter is actually not holding the water on site very much at all. So if you see those, definitely they do not get stormwater credit for that. And the easy way to know the difference between a flow through planter and an infiltration planter is a flow through planter will have a drain, like a little cap. I'm sure we've all seen them, like a little beehive cap where the water can go into, and then it'll go to the sewer system. And then oftentimes flow through planters actually have liners as well on the side. They just look like a black mat, or like a trampoline mat. So again, the water is just going straight down and into the system, so they don't get credit for that. Yeah, so you can see here, you can see this is the overflow. Once the water fills up, it goes into this pipe and then straight to the sewer system. The main difference between a flow-through planter and an eco roof, and why I think the eco roof is a menu item, is because it's covering the whole impervious area of that where the eco roof is. So in a flow-through planter, it's actually getting a ton of water draining from the rest of the whole building. So it's just a ton of water, and it just can't hold that much water. So it's almost instantly gonna fill up and then go into the system. Whereas an eco roof, it's only managing the roof, the area that it's on. So the turnaround time from like the water soaking to the drain layer and then getting to the system is very, very slow, just because it's just a less water on that system. Okay, so here are some examples. You'll see these a lot on the west side of Portland because they have those steep slopes, and because they don't have super great draining soils. So you could see here, it just looks like a planter, a regular planter box. And then here with the concrete. And yeah, just being aware of those, they might come up, and oftentimes homeowners don't really know what kind of stormwater system they have on site. So if someone does mention like, oh, I have a stormwater planter, I should get some stormwater credit, maybe you can do some community outreach and explain a little bit about why that's not really managing the stormwater on site. Okay, planter's gone wrong. This is just craziness. And it doesn't have the planter sides built up. It's not actually able to hold water here. This one, the inlet, or I have another thing. So the inlet is too high. So this is probably a planter that drains a paved area. You've probably seen them in parking lots where the parking lot is sloped to one side, and then at the end of it, you'll have a planter. And here the inlet is too high, so the water can't even actually get into the planter. And then here the overflow is too high, so it's not doing its job. It's keeping the water on site because it's not getting into the overflow system and then into the sewer system. But there's a reason why this planter was built, a flow-through planter was built, and not an infiltration planter. So this is probably causing, with having a high overflow like this, the water is probably going back out the way it came and creating a flooding situation in this area. Because it's at the bottom, it's at the downslope, say it's a parking lot, it's at the bottom of the sloped parking lot, and isn't able to go into the system, so it's just staying there and not going anywhere. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. I think we're pretty right on schedule here. I have a little bit more to talk. I could talk more about the downspout disconnection program, but I'm going to stop right there for questions.
Awesome. If folks want to just chat in any questions that you have, that would be great. I know that a question came up and JP was tracking it. One additional just context that I'll provide that I know that SK spoke to is because the program is across 4 counties, there SK kind of referenced how certain things are going to be appropriate in Portland and maybe not in others. And really in particular, the thing that can come up is the disconnected downspout. So in certain kind of wide swaths of Washington County, as well as portions of Clackamas County, it's actually discouraged to disconnect downspouts. Some of that is really going to due to the quality of the soils, as well as, you know, kind of the west side of the West Hills, that sloping going down into kind of a high flood area. And so they have a separated system in Washington County as an example, and they want people to put it in. So just always knowing this is something we'll work with. But one of the things in talking to someone, our technicians are 100% going to talk to them about that and that initial go through. But it's always helpful to know in general, so that people know just that the situation can vary, and there might be certain situations where someone might just ask about, like, oh, I was told not to do that, and just knowing, like, right, there's a reason. You don't have to know all the reasons or any of it. Some of this is SK is giving you the background, and no one has to be stormwater experts aside from SK. But maybe JP can jump in with just a couple of the questions that have come up.
Yeah, so there was a question that I answered privately. Does removal of hardscaping, such as concrete patio, with permeable pavers count towards the stormwater management? So the answer is yes. We have that as one of the menu items. And this question is for SK, how can you determine if the old dry well shown on Portland maps are still working on your property?
Oh, it's pretty easy. I mean, if it shows that you have a dry well and you keep getting water backing up at the standpipe, so where the pipe that goes underground and your downspout is, if you're seeing that water is coming up right there, that's an indication that you might have a dry well that's no longer working effectively. That's the #1 way to tell if you get water backing up at the house.
Great, thank you. Do you need to get a permit for every street tree that you plant?
Do you have to get a permit? I'm pretty sure you do in the city of Portland.
You do. SK, do you want me to speak to this one?
Yeah, I don't work with trees.
Only because Susie could as well, because we both have worked in the world of trees specifically. So it varies by city. Within the city of Portland, you are required to. Within the city of Vancouver, you are required to. And a lot of the others, so I don't want to name all of them, but a lot of cities do require permits for both planting and removal. So yes, but specifically within the city of Portland, it is required. And some of those permits are also required around the removal of like yard trees. So each city has a different kind of requirements around this.
And the last question that we got that is related to SK presentation is, it is a comment, it's not a question, that the city of Tigard requires permit to disconnect downspouts, but that they are very supportive of doing that. So you should not have trouble getting the permits.
Okay, good to know for my presentation next year.
And I would, yeah, it's tricky now because we're working in 4 different counties, and every city has different regulations. Every county has different regulations. It really just depends on where you're working. And so on that note, I wanted to share, some cities also require a permit for installing rain gardens. Like Westland specifically has a permit that you need to get. They send a city staff person out to do a whole assessment and to give you guidance. So it's a good thing. They're helping you build like a good rain garden, basically. So that's just my note to all the folks who are in this training today, to let them know, like, you'll just want to check with your local city folks to make sure that you don't need a permit, or if you do, they might have some support for you.
And one other thing I might just also weigh in on that, just to add, is that, we educate our technicians with this information, and it is 100% okay if someone were to ask you during a certification visit, like, do I have to have a permit for this, or this? And for you to say, I don't know, I would recommend you reach out to Backyard Habitat. So part of that is the beauty. I'm very good at saying what I don't know. I used to joke when people would ask me to identify how old a tree is. I was like, I could make it up, but I don't know the answer, but we can, So it's always okay if you don't know the answer to a particular question. And we can also always reach out to someone like SK if there's a particular question that we're a little bit stumped by to seek some clarity.
Totally.
Any other stormwater questions? I feel like SK covered a lot of ground, and I also learned in that presentation. I know that we have Paul here kind of queued up. So we can also, SK, this is one thing that I've just kind of asked of some folks. If you feel comfortable just sharing your presentation so that we have access, I can put it into a PDF and make it available to everyone. But also, if people have questions, if it's okay to direct them to you as well, because maybe something will come up that they didn't think of right now because they're digesting all the great information, but in the future, or maybe later on, they would want to ask you.
Yeah, definitely. I love talking about stormwater.